The Tennis Gambling Podcast on the Sports Gambling Podcast Network is brought to you by Xfinity. Sign the promo code SGPN to claim your first-time deposit offer of up to $200 in bonus cash. We're also brought to you by Rhythm. Get your 7-day free trial today by going to sportsgames.com. Rhythm, RITHMM. And welcome, everybody, to the Tennis Gambling Podcast here on the Sports Gambling Podcast Network. It's currently Sunday morning, roughly 10:45 a.m. Eastern Time on August 18th. I'm your host, always Scott Reichel, once again going solo for this pod. Should be a pretty short episode because it is time to get into the semifinals in Cincinnati. So we're going to preview two matchups. We have the matchup between Sinner and Zverev and the matchup between Rune and Tiafoe. Going to preview both of those in a little while. Before we get into that, though, you want to take care of some housekeeping? I want to remind you once again, first of all, to don't forget to like, subscribe on YouTube. Don't forget to rate the podcast on Spotify or Apple. So if you're still listening to it audio only on Spotify or Apple, that is okay. But once again, a reminder, please leave some feedback with a rating and a review. And if you are on YouTube, first of all, welcome. If you're in the live stream, or just hi if you are listening to it in the video format after the live stream takes place. Point is, though, if you do want to join the live stream, you can. That's definitely available for you. And you can still leave some support or at least some feedback with a like and subscribe, or even a comment in the comment section down below. Now, before we get into the actual, once again, recap of the last episode, do want to remind everybody once again that we also have some merchandise on the SGPN merch store. We do have a lot of good Tennis Gambling Podcast merch. We have sweatshirts, regular shirts, and mugs. I recommend getting yourself something. It's pretty cheap and also has some high quality, especially the clothes, which I do have a couple of. So I recommend getting yourself a shirt. Different colors, different sizes, and once again, very comfortable. So check out the merch store. And a reminder that we also have some other shows with the network, not just this show. And right now, there is a great deal on the merch store. Everything in the merch store is 10% off with the promo code football. Recommend getting, once again, a Tennis Gambling Podcast shirt, which I do think has a lot of, I'd say, perks based on how comfortable it is and how nice I think it actually looks. Either way, though, time to get into the actual recap of the last episode. Unfortunately, not a great episode for us because we ended up going 0-2. For the lock, we had Sinner to have more double faults than Rublev at about minus 150, and that didn't get there as Sinner ended up double faulting 5 times, which is a decent amount. The problem was Rublev double faulted 7 times. Now, I have to admit that it was a little bit unfortunate that the weather was pretty, let's say, unpredictable for the course of this matchup, mostly based on the wind. I'll get into that in a bit more detail in a second. The wind in that Sinner and Rublev match was crazy. So that was a completely, I'd say, unique variable that we had a hard time fully accounting for when we gave out the play in the first place. Point is, though, that you ended up seeing Sinner and Rublev really struggle to actually keep the ball in play, whether that involves serves or just based on the actual rallies themselves. Like playing in a wind tunnel, it was really just an insane match, which was entertaining, but also kind of silly and ridiculous because it just seemed like the wind was taking every shot, and whoever actually lasted the longest trying to avoid the wind blowing a shot wide was going to win the actual rally, and eventually Sinner did outlast him in 3. But for the sake of double faults, Rublev really had a hard time with the wind, and he double faulted 7 times. So that was kind of the story of the actual prop. It went up in flames. Sinner having 5 was definitely something that we expected with or without wind, but Rublev really had a hard time serving with the wind, and because of that, we ended up losing our prop at about minus 150. I still like the read in general. Unfortunately, the weather didn't really cooperate, and all the other matches were pretty, I'd say, fine based on weather. But the point is, Sinner did not have more double faults. Rublev did, and they combined for 12, which tells you how bad the wind actually was. Either way, though, point is, picked up a loss there for the lock. For the dog, wasn't really that close. Had Draper and Rune over 2.5 sets at plus 125. Most of the matches were competitive, very competitive on Saturday. Unfortunately, though, Draper and Rune was not, as Rune dominated. First set was close. Rune won, and then he dominated the second set. So Draper kind of ran out of gas after the 3 setters in every round prior. Rune did a good job of taking control of the match, and he didn't really let his foot off the gas. So really just a bad read there. Getting into the actual recap, though, of the matches as a whole. Mentioned before that Sinner did end up winning. Was a very crazy match as he lost the first set to Rublev, then he won in 3. The real story was the wind, which was kind of the, I don't want to say only talking point, but it was really the only thing I could actually mention from that actual matchup, because I understand people in, let's say, hindsight might look at the actual score, criticize Rublev for losing to Sinner because he was up a set and he kind of let Sinner off the hook. At the end of the day, it was a very weird match just based on the actual conditions. And as a result, I do have to kind of have an excuse prepared for Rublev because it was a very unique experience as a viewer or as a player. I can only imagine as a player, where it just seemed like the shots that you were actually normally, I'd say, hitting with ease were suddenly difficult because the wind was carrying pretty much every shot. We saw the final point, for example. Sinner hit a regular shot, and the ball absolutely just died on Rublev, and Rublev couldn't get there. And that was the winner. It was like a regular shot, and the ball was just completely blown out of the way by the wind. And as a result, Rublev couldn't reach it. And it was a winner that was landing basically in the middle of the court. So that kind of sums up exactly what I'm talking about with the wind. If you want to just rewatch that last point, it was very competitive, though. And we saw a Rublev once again keep Sinner in some trouble, as he has done throughout his career. Now, Sinner did get revenge after the loss in Montreal, but we thought it'd be a competitive match. Didn't mind the over 2.5 sets that did get there. Unfortunately, though, did take a pretty, I'd say, obscure prop instead for the lock, which in hindsight I kind of regret. Either way, though, getting into the other matches, you had Zverev beating Shelton in 3. That was a fun match. Wind wasn't as big of a factor in that one, so it was mostly a one-off how crazy the wind was in that Sinner-Rublev match. But Zverev did lose the first set to Shelton. Then he came back and he ended up winning the second set 7-6. Then he won the third set 7-5 after getting the break in the 5-5 game. So we thought Zverev would win. Props to Shelton, though, who played very well after not looking the best against Echeverry, for example, a couple rounds ago. But the point is he kind of found his form in these courts, but Zverev's just a bit too solid for him, and Zverev eventually did get the job done in the third set. For the other match, you had, or the other two matches, you had pretty underwhelming ones because you had the marathons that kind of started the day off, and the other two matches just couldn't maintain the hype, as Tiafoe ended up beating Hurkacz 6-3. That was it. Hurkacz ended up retiring due to injury, so definitely not what people expected to happen. Hurkacz retiring to injury, I can't say the most shocking thing in the world based on how many sets of tennis he had to play since coming back from injury, where he had a bunch of three-setters, and that was also the case in this event. So he just kind of ran out of gas there, as Tiafoe was able to get a break relatively early in the first set, held on, and then eventually Hurkacz did lose the set and then eventually quit right after the set point. So if you had Tiafoe on the money line, you actually ended up cashing, according to most books, because one full set was completed. So shout out to Hurkacz for actually, I'd say, hanging in there enough for Tiafoe bettors to get paid on the money line if they ended up betting it on a book which has some house rules that support you. Reminder, shop around to make sure you find the best house rules. Some books won't pay you for retirements. Others will if one full set's complete. And based on what happened in the match on Saturday, Tiafoe moneyline bettors should have gotten paid if you are reading the house rules properly. Also, the last match, once again, was underwhelming, as Rooney did beat Draper 6-4, 6-2. So, pretty interesting overall card. The matches early were competitive. The matches late were not. We had one retirement, which is always unfortunate, but the point is Tiafoe and Rooney are now in the semis against each other, while you have Zverev against Sinner in the other semis. So we're going to get into the actual matches in a second. Before we get into the actual semis, do want to remind you once again, though, that we are brought to Underdog Fantasy because Underdog is giving you a chance to win 1,000 times your entry or play fantasy football the right way with Best Ball Mania. Best Ball Mania is now live with $15 in prizes, and you can now use specials and boost on all flex entries. I'll probably end up doing something today with, I'm trying to think of what I want to do for WNBA for a potential market here. You know what? I'll go with Diggins Smith. We'll go with her higher points and assists. So that'll be the angle we go with here for the WNBA card on Sunday. Sign the promo code SGPN to claim your special pick and first-time positive offer of bonus cash on fantasy. Promo code SGPN. We're also brought to you by Circuit Survivor and Circuit Millions. Circuit Sports is back with Circuit Survivor and Circuit Millions, giving away $60 million in guaranteed prizes. And a reminder that you should book a trip to Las Vegas for football because Ultimate Cause Weekend is a great time to go. You can hang out with Ryan and Sean. Enjoy some of the open bar events in the World of Sportsbook from August 22nd through the 24th. Use promo code SGP15 to 15% of your hotel room for sign-up weekend. A reminder, sign up in person at Circuit Sports between now and September 7th for the contest and use proxy to play from anywhere. We deal the proxy. Go to proxythefootballcontest.com. Save $50 promo code SGP, and you also get a free hat. Welcome back, everyone, to the Tennis Gambling Podcast. Just finished recapping what happened in the Saturday quarterfinal matches. Now it's time to preview the Sunday semifinal matches. Starting off with the first match on the actual card, you have a matchup Just to go in order here, the first match will be arguably the best one between Sinner and Zverev. So pretty interesting that this one is going to be the first one. Point is, though, that you have a pretty decent favorite here, as Sinners are about minus 190. Zverev's about plus 160, plus 170 shopping around. For the actual game spread, though, you have minus 2.5 for Sinner, plus 2.5 for Zverev, and the over-under in games is set at 23.5. Now, for the actual sets, the over 2.5 sets is around plus 130, and for the set spread, you have Sinner minus 1.5 sets at plus 150. Zverev to an ace set is minus 180. Now, Sinner so far in the event has been fine. You could argue he's been a bit vulnerable, though, because Rublev brought him to a pretty difficult situation, which was a third set, where he was also down a set in the first place, so definitely not the easiest win for Sinner there. Had a walkover in the second round against Thompson, and then he ended up having a competitive win against Mickelson in the first round, which he did not drop a set in, but it still landed 22 to fight off a couple break points. So Sinner's been fine. Hasn't looked the most comfortable, but he's been getting the job done, and he seems like he's relatively healthy, at least compared to how he looked against Rublev in that Montreal loss. So health has been fine for Sinner. Then again, he has not looked dominant. So you could argue that he's definitely compromised to some degree, but he has been good enough to get the job done. Now, Sinner has still been a very, very solid player for the last couple months, just not as good as he was when the season started. Now, Zverev's been good in the event. He's had a couple of competitive sets, but he's been, for the most part, I'd say solid. Now, Shelton brought him to, once again, a difficult situation, which was a third set that was tied 5-5, but Zverev to get the job done coming back from a set down on Saturday. Now, I do want to point out, though, that was the only set that Zverev's dropped in the entire event so far, as he was able to beat Busta 7-5, 7-6. He was a break in each of those two sets, gave it back, though, so he could have won that more comfortably. Instead, the matchup did look very competitive, and he beat Kashanov in the first match here, 6-3, 6-2. Now, the reason why the line might seem a bit cheap with a Sinner at about minus 190 is because Zverev, despite being the underdog in this actual matchup, has been really good in the head-to-head. In fact, Zverev is currently 4-1 lifetime in the head-to-head against Sinner. So Zverev has kind of had Sinner's number over the years. Now, they have not had many meetings recently. Face off in the U.S. Open last year, where Zverev did beat Sinner in 5. Face off Monte Carlo in 2022. Sinner did win that one in 3. And they also faced off a couple other times in 2021 and 2020, where Zverev beat him in the U.S. Open in 3 in 2021. Faced off in Germany in 2020. And you saw Zverev win that one in straight sets in the face-off in Roland Garros in 2020. Sinner did win that one in 4. So Zverev, if you're doing the math at home, has won 4 straight head-to-head meetings. And even though the meetings are a bit dated, point is on hard court, Zverev is 2-0 lifetime. So if you want to just go based on the head-to-head, there's value on Zverev because he's a dog to a guy that is actually beaten about 75%, about 80% of the time, actually, winning 4 of the 5 matches. Now, I do think based on the overall form of both players in this event, the line should be a lot closer. I get that Sinner is once again ranked higher, but Zverev's been solid in the event, and you could argue that Sinner has looked a little bit compromised, at least based on him struggling against Mickelson and him having to go 3 sets against Rublev. It was a very weird match, though. I keep harping on it, but it's really tough to make any takeaways from that Rublev match because the wind was so crazy that it really just barely resembled tennis at points. I just feel like Sinner, once again, was fortunate to get by, didn't look dominant, but on the other hand, you could argue that he won in a very difficult environment based on the weather, and he should look sharper with regular weather. But I do think that Zverev is capable of getting the job done. I think that the argument against Sinner would be minus 190 is a bit steep since Zverev is 4-1 lifetime. I would have Sinner like minus 140, minus 150. I think 190 is actually too big. I would probably have Zverev at a cheaper money line price than plus 150, plus 160. So for this one, I am going to go with the dog here, but I do like the over. I see 22.5 games. I like minus 128 or so. Don't mind the over there. I don't mind the over 2.5 sets. Point is, though, if you're looking at the head-to-head meetings, even when Sinner does win, the matches have been close. Faced off in the U.S. Open last year, they did split the first 2 sets that ended up going over this total. Monte Carlo did go to 3. The U.S. Open previously in 2021 was a straight sets win for Zverev, but they were competitive, 6-4, 6-4, 7-6, and the other matches are pretty dated. But the point is, you are looking at a matchup between 2 guys that are, of course, top-tier players. Sinner's a bit higher up. You could argue that he might be a bit injured, so definitely not as good as he was earlier in the year when he basically hadn't lost a match for a couple months. But 3 of the 5 meetings have not ended in straight sets, which definitely benefits the over as well. So I'm going to go with the over here. I think you might get a breaker. You might end up getting potentially 3 sets. We saw, for example, Zverev have a 7-6 and a 7-5 set in each of the last 2 rounds against Shelton and against Busta. So he's had a couple long sets in general. Sinner has had a couple long sets too against Mickelson and against Rublev. I think he had a 7-5 there in the Rublev match. So point is, I do think that Zverev has some value. I think Sinner might end up winning, but I don't agree with the price. So I'm going to lean to Zverev based on the value, but I prefer the over if I had to go for my favorite play in that one. See a couple people in the comment section, though. I see Heidi saying that Draper was a bit distracted from all the drama, which he ended up winning last match with the double bounce, that kind of weird last shot. Not take away from Rune's talent, but expected to be closer. So did I. Thought it'd be a close match. Unfortunately, though, Rune ended up dominating. I guess he just wore red and decided to just look like prime Tiger, I guess. But the point is, Rune was dominant, and that was just unfortunate for us, is what it is. Caetano saying that he likes Sinner to win and over 1.5 breaks. I don't mind the breaks play if you are looking at potentially 3 sets. Zverev barely won against a clown, but yeah, I get it. The point is, I do think Shelton was definitely rising to the occasion. I was roasting him on Twitter during the Echeverry match because he should have lost it. And he really just squandered a bunch of free opportunities to break. And we know Echeverry's not a great server. He was a lot better in the last 2 rounds. So I understand what you're trying to say. I'm going based on value, though. I think 190 is a bit too steep for me. So I am going to link to Zverev, but I do like the over as my main thought on that one. Moving on to the next match. You have a matchup between Rune and Tiafoe. For this one, Rune is about minus 155. Tiafoe is about plus 135. For the spread here, minus 1.5 for Rune, and you have plus 1.5 for Tiafoe. You have that's for the game spread. For the over/under, you have around 22.5 or about 23. And for the set spread here, you have Rune in straight sets at about plus 175. Tiafoe in straight sets at plus 275. The over 2.5 sets is around plus 125. Now, no career head-to-head meetings, so nothing to really go by based on history. But to mention the overall path of both players, they've both been pretty solid. In fact, you could argue that both guys have been kind of similar throughout the entirety of this event because Rune had a couple of interesting matches early. He had a 3-setter against Berrettini in the first round where he lost the first set. Then he ended up beating Borges in straight sets. Did win the breaker 10-8, though. So point is he could have dropped a set there. Then ended up dropping a set to Monfils and ended up beating Draper in straight sets. Tiafoe, though, had a bit of a struggle early, or I should say, I mean, he ended up winning against Fokina in straight sets, but he could have easily dropped that second set. I think he was down a break in that one. Killed Musetti, 6-3, 6-2, then almost lost to Leheshka, won 6-4, 6-7, 7-6, and then won a set against Hurkacz yesterday before Hurkacz ended up quitting. So both guys should be relatively rested. I know that Tiafoe did only play 1 set compared to Rune's 2, but Rune was very comfortable. So it wasn't like the Sinner and Zverev match where both guys had marathons. It was the opposite. Both guys had pretty straightforward matches, and Tiafoe had half a match that was very straightforward. So both guys should look pretty sharp. Now, I do think that Rune should be the favorite based on A, reputation, B, based on actual resume, and C, based on maybe eye test with how good Rune looked in the match on Saturday. However, I do think 160 with Rune is always a dangerous proposition because he could easily self-destruct at any moment, and you can make the same argument about Tiafoe. These odds feel a bit large to me. I find it interesting that like Sinner's minus 190 being viewed as a top 3 player in the world, and you're looking at Rune being minus 160 despite being a relative head case for his entire career. So I don't agree with the price here. I think Rune should be favored, but I do think that it should be closer, in my opinion, to like minus 130, especially with the crowd being in favor of Tiafoe since he's the only American left in the event. Based on value, I am going to once again link to the dog because I do think that Tiafoe has the ability to get the job done, even though I think that he can also be an extreme head case, and I don't trust him to win big matches. The price does feel a little bit steep on Rune. You could argue that it's deserved, and maybe he's regained his form. Point is, though, I do think it's a big price for a guy that if things go bad early, might roll over. We've seen Rune kind of mentally check out of matches that he's been trailing in before, and Tiafoe's done the same. So you might end up seeing a close matchup where whoever wins the first set maybe front runs and the other guy ends up rolling over. But I do think based on the price, 160 or so is a bit high. I think that Rune should be around minus 130, in my opinion. So based on value, I'll link to Tiafoe. Even though you can make the argument that one guy might end up quitting mentally if things go poorly early, I do like the over in this matchup. I think both guys have looked sharp over the last couple rounds. I think that Tiafoe and Rune will be able to just stand behind the baseline for a while, just really having extremely long rallies. And I do think that might result in some back and forth, I'd say, swings for both guys, where you might see one guy perform well early, then he kind of hits a wall. The other guy changes some game plan stuff and ends up performing well. I think I am going to lean to the over, though, in this one. I just think that even though Rune did dominate the match on Saturday, and so did Tiafoe, I do think that you're going to see a more competitive match unfold between these two. And I do think that Tiafoe has definitely improved over the last couple of weeks. We saw that in DC. He ended up losing to Korda, who eventually won the title. So it is what it is. But he has been playing better, and Rune has been playing better too. Both guys, though, I do think are going to stand by on the baseline for almost the entirety of this matchup. Both guys are pretty decent servers. I think Tiafoe is probably the better server. But I think for this one, you might see a bit of a marathon. Don't mind the over in this one at about plus 125 on the set or for the games. But I do think that the Sinner and Zverev match has a better chance of having two separate tie breaks basically in the first two sets. I think that there's a better chance of getting 23.5 in the Sinner Zverev match in straight sets than the Rune Tiafoe match in straight sets. I personally think if you're going to get 23.5 in that Tiafoe match, you're probably getting 3. And I don't really see you getting that in 2. But for this reason, I am going to go with the over. And I am going to go with the over 2.5 sets as well for this one. Besides that, though, the thing that's going to wrap it up for the actual semis, now it's time to get into the lock and dog picks. That one, remember, once again, they're brought to you by Rhythm because football season is here. I think we're about 1 week away, actually, from college football week 0. 4 games coming up next Saturday, I believe. So get excited. NFL models and college football models are now live on Rhythm. You can create your own winning model or let Rhythm do it for you. You decide what stats matter to you, and Rhythm can help you build a custom model around it. Or you just let Rhythm and pick the model do the heavy lifting. They also have AI projections from data scientists, and they have you covered for week 1 of the NFL season and the week 0 of the college football season. A reminder, sign up with the free day trial because you can end up getting a 7-day free trial, and you can get that by going to sportscampus.com, Rhythm, sportscampus.com, so RATHMM. We're also brought to you by Game Time. A reminder that Game Time is now an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down closer to first pitch. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from receipt, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. And a reminder, they have some features that I do love. The immediate seat views feature is my favorite, which definitely tells you how you can potentially avoid getting disaster seats, because I'm sure we've all been there before. You have found a seat that you actually like, you spend your money, you get to the arena, and you realize that your view is obstructed by a pole or some type of just something that you really didn't expect to see, and as a result, you ended up paying for something that kind of sabotaged your actual viewing experience as a fan. That won't happen with this feature because you can see a preview of the view you would be getting from the actual app itself before you spend your money, so you'll never really get a bad seat ever again. A reminder, though, that when you do end up making an account with Game Time, when you download the app, you can also use the code SGPN for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and you redeem code SGPN, $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Welcome back, everyone, to the Tennis Gambling Podcast. Just finished previewing the 2 semifinal matchups in Cincinnati for Sunday. Now it's time for the lock and dog picks. For the lock, I am going to go back to the first match between Sinner and Zverev, and I am going to go with the over 22.5 games at about minus 128 on FanDuel. Couple reasons why we are going to go with this over. First reason, 3 is Zverev's last 4 matches have gone over this number. We saw the last 2 go over. The 3-setter against Shelton and the straight sets win against Busta both went over this number. And you're looking at Sinner, who's had a competitive match against Mickelson that did land 22, but we know Mickelson is not nearly as good as Zverev, and they have a 3-set marathon against Rublev in the match on Saturday. So both guys have been involved in some longer matches recently. Zverev's gone over this number in 3 of the last 4. Sinner's gone over this number in 2 of the last 3. And I find it fascinating that Sinner once again is a minus 190 favorite, while Zverev has won 4 of the last 5 meetings. I am giving Zverev more than a puncher's chance to get this job done, but I think mostly he will make the match competitive. I'm not expecting Sinner to just run through him. And with that being the case, I can definitely see a marathon unfolding. 3 of the 5 career meetings in the head-to-head have not ended in straight sets. I think that's definitely going to be a decent script for this matchup as well. And I think Sinner is still not looking 100%, while Zverev has been looking better But the point is, I can see a lot of rallies here, a lot of long rallies, and a lot of ebbs and flows. I don't see Sinner or Zverev dominating. I see a very close match, maybe a breaker in there. A couple ways to get there. I do think that getting over this number of 22.5 in straight sets with like a 7-6, 6-4 is actually realistic, but you can get there in 3 sets as well. So I am going to go with the over as my lock. For my dog, I'm once again going to expect a competitive matchup. This time in the Rune and Tiafoe match, I am going to go with the over 2.5 sets at about plus 125. Tiafoe's lost at least one set in 14 of his last 20, so he has been dropping sets quite regularly over the last couple months, while Rune has dropped at least one set in 5 of his last 8 matches. Now, both guys have played really well so far in the event, especially over the last couple rounds, but I do think both guys are playing so well that they're going to have kind of a canceling out effect, where both guys are going to have moments, and you're going to see a lot of, I'd say, ups and downs for both guys. We know that mentally, both guys can't have dips in their games all the time. I think it's going to be a close matchup. Maybe you end up getting a breaker in there where you might end up having to sweat it out a little bit. But I do think that you're looking at each guy probably winning a set here in what should be a very, very close match. I don't agree with the minus 160 price point for Rune. I think it should be closer. But give me a competitive matchup between two guys that are, in my opinion, head cases. And I think that's going to be a pretty solid approach. Similar to the Rublev and a Tiafoe match that we ended up breaking down a couple weeks ago, which was expecting two head cases to kind of kill each other, and I think you're going to see a close match. So give me the over in that one as a result. Spoiler once again, here for the semifinal matches, the lock's going to be on Sinner and Zverev over 22.5 games at minus 128. The dog will be on Rune and Tiafoe over 2.5 sets of plus 125. A reminder back once again for the final in Cincinnati. However, we also have a tournament to preview in Winston-Salem. Now, I'm not sure how long future odds are going to be up because qualifying is starting in a bit, and I believe some matches are actually starting today in a couple hours. So I do recognize the importance of getting an episode out. I already did my research for it, just have to actually set up the stream. So probably going to do that episode in a little while. So stay tuned for that. But until next time, you can find me on Twitter at Reichel Radio, find me on the NBA show, find me on the WNBA show, and find me on the MLB show as well. Until next time, good luck to all of you and all of your bets. Bye, everyone.